Good evening, 8:40. We're ready to get started. Tonight we're learning Maseches, Pesachim, Daf, Nun, Gimel. Just to chart the course for the next few days. The next few blot are a little complex in their size. Tonight's not so bad. We'll finish at the bottom of Nun Gimel. Tomorrow is Thursday, but if you look at Thursday's blot to get all of Nun Dalid and Nun Hamid Aleph is a lot. We should get close. Shabbos will be a real, that's a real test. However, the good news is that on the top of Nun Zayin Amud Beis, it's a super short blot. So I will be splitting up the blot in a little bit of a different way over the coming days to make sure that sanity prevails while we still will be on task by the time I go out of town. So hopefully Sunday night we should be totally aligned. Tonight will be aligned, but tomorrow night and Shabbos and Sunday I'm going to be being a little bit different in my differentiations. So tonight we're beginning on Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, about 10 lines down. We're going to be learning a sugya, a little bit of a continuing sugya about what the parameters are from when a food is considered to have stopped growing as it relates to shvius. Then we're going to be learning a new Mishnah toward the bottom of the page about minhag makom. We'll be dealing a little bit about foods that appear to be kodshim, and we'll discuss that. And then the next Mishnah on the next page, which we're going to learn as well, is about the minhag of not lighting candles or lighting candles on Yom Kippur as a minhag to prevent a couple from violating the Isser of Tashmish Amita, one of the Chamesh Sinuyim. So let's get started. 10 lines down. Tanu Rabbanan Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis have taught us. Ochlin ba'navim ad sheyichlu delio shel ochel. They used to have these types of wood poles that would hold up the grapes, and when the grapes on those poles would be kalu, when they would finish growing, so then that would be the point at which point the food would become shvis. If there's anything that's a little bit later, ochlen alehen. If there's anything left over, any grapes at all, then shvis has not kicked in yet. No din of biur. Ochlen b'zeisim. What about olives? In the city of Tekoa, that's where they used as their measure. Rabbi Eliezer Omer achron shel gush chalav. Gush chalav is a physical location, and it appears there that there's what looks to be like milk that kind of runs down the mountains. It's not, it just has a white look to it, so it's had the name of Gush Chalav, and the measure there is that you can't find on the branches, you can't find by the root, a rova, a certain measure of olives, which would then, because you can't find it, so therefore we've triggered the requirement of biur as it relates to shavi'is, as it relates to Shemitah. Next, continuing in the Brisa, Ochlin big rogeris, you can eat dried figs, page beis hini, until the smaller page besini are some diminished form of dates. When those run out, so then the halacha is that shvius for grogeris, for dried figs, kicks in. Amar Rabbi Yehuda lo huzkaru page besini ela le'inyan meiser. That wasn't really mentioned for the din of shvius. That was only mentioned because of meiser. After all, page besini ve'ahini de tuvina, these two different types of figs, chayavin b'meiser. Continuing in the brisa, ochlen b'tmar, you can eat dates at sheich le'achron shebet zohar, until all of them in the city of Zohar have been completed. Rashbag Omer, and we saw this on the top of Nun Beis Amud Beis yesterday. Rashbag Omer ochlen al shel ben hakipin. You can eat the ones that are, you can still consider it to be low kalu, that the food hasn't finished growing, as long as the fruits are ben hakipin, they're between the branches. However, ve'ein ochlen al shel ben hashitzin. You are not allowed to eat if the only thing that's left is that which is among the thorns. Now, all of this whole brisa, to summarize in a sentence, gives us agricultural markers for when the chiyuv of shvius kicks in. This location has, we know in Tekoa, they're agricultural identifiers that tell us when it kicks in. However, Uraminhi, we have another source in the Tanaim that does not seem to be agricultural at all. In fact, it seems to be a little bit different. It seems to be that it's all about time and not agriculture. What does it say? Uraminhi, the Brisa writes halfway down in Gimel Amud Aleph to contrast the last 10 lines we just saw. Here's a very different version. Ochlen va'navim ada Pesach. Forget about the poles and when the grapes stop growing. No, that's not the measure. The measure is time. It's Pesach. With olives, it's until Shavuos. The grogeris ad haChanukah. A rare mention of Chanukah in the sources in the Tanaim. Of course, we know the famous Gemara in Perek Bamim Madlikin. There we had some sources in the Tanaim about Chanukah, an uncommon reference by grogeris, by dried figs until Chanukah, b'tmarim ad Purim. Amar Rabibi Rav Yochanan Tarte Basrais Machav. He switched the two times of Chanukah and Purim for the last two. But what do we see in here? What we see here is a little bit different. The first brisa indicated that it all depends on the agriculture, and the agriculture there indicated that when every fruit by its own location, by its own agriculture, that's what would determine the point at which it became a chayav for biur, when it would then need to be burned. However, here it's just calendaric. So it's agricultural is the first brisa. The second brisa is calendaric. You just look at the calendar. Is it Hanukkah yet? Is it Purim yet? Yes or no? It's not about how many grapes are left on the vine. It's not about how many olives you can collect, a rova or not a rova. So these two brisas have two totally different drachim, and they conflict with one another. Do we say that the trigger that brings the food of Shvius into biur, do we say that that trigger is agricultural, or do we say that it's calendaric? So the Gemara provides two answers. Last of the short lines is answer number one. No. Come on, they're just one and the same. It doesn't mean to separate itself in that way. And because of that, they really are the same exact thing. And the second answer, no, really there's a blending of the two brisas. Yes, the rule is calendaric. Yes, the second brisa is the primary. However, if it happens to be that after the calendar date, there still are some leftover fruits, then we go to the first brisa and we say, if it's going to be grapes, it's going to be on the poles. If it's going to be olives, we're going to follow tekoa. So these two brisas don't agree with one another. These two answers don't agree with one another. The first answer says they're exactly the same, which means that once you hit the calendaric date, there's never a leniency afterwards. However, according to the second answer of the Gemara, and this really crystallizes the way to understand it, the second answer of the Gemara is that we couple the two brisas together. They're not the same. They are one after the other. Namely, yes, calendaric is the minimum. However, it's possible that there will still be grapes, still be olives, still be dried figs afterwards. When do we have to stop eating them and say that they're chayiv and biur? That's only going to be in a scenario where there's nothing left on the vine. And that's how the Gemara answers that. Tanya, the brisa writes, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Simin laharim milin. The way that we know that there's a mountain is because of milin, a tree that grows some kind of nuts. That's what the Meforshim right here. We'll see what all of this means shortly. Simin la'amakim. How do we know that there's something that's called a valley? Because the kalim, there's trees that grow there. There's palm trees. Simin l'chalim kanim. When we talk about water beds, there's going to be kanim. There's going to be reeds. Simin l'shfela shikma. For the flat grounds, we have shikma, sycamore tree. And even though there's no raya that we define these places with these types of vegetation, even though there's no raya l'davar, there is a zecher. What does the pasuk say? We'll see in this pasuk that shikma and shvela, that the sycamore tree and the shvela, the flat grounds, we can see that those are quoted in the same pasuk as connected to one another. Shnei Amar, 2/3 of the way down, by Yitin HaMelech HaSakesef B'Yerushalayim K'avanim V'Asarazim Nasan Kishkamim Asher B'Shvela L'Rov. So we see that we define a shvela by the word shkamim. What about simin laharim milin and simin la'amakim tekalim? Why is it important for us to define that a mountain is defined by milin, by this tree that grows nuts? And why is it that amakim are defined by tekalim, that valleys are defined by an amek? So says the Gemara, nafkamina b'bikurim. The difference is as to whether or not these trees would be chayiv in bikurim. Titnan, the Mishnah writes, we're about 6 lines into the wide lines, Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. Titnan, the Mishnah writes, ein mevin bikurim el mishivas haminin. First parameter, all of the bikurim can only come from the shivas haminim as listed in the Torah. Second of all, the lomi dekalim shebeharim, not palm trees that grow up on the mountain. No, only the ones that grow down in the amakim. V'lomi peros shebe amakim. And fruits, we don't grow them in the amakim, we grow them up higher. So basically what the Mishnah and Shvius is indicating to us is that vegetation, agricultural things have the appropriate place to grow. So when we said above that it says that simin laharim milin and simin la'amakim dekalim, that's a real nafkamina in regards to the mitzvah of bikurim. Not everything is eligible for bikurim. If you have a palm tree that's growing at a very high elevation, that is exempt from the mitzvah of bikurim. These are nafkaminas midoraisa. What about simin l'nachal and kanim? What is the nafkamina in regards to saying that there are reeds by the nachal? So there, nafkamina l'nachal esan. We know by the mitzvah of egla rufa, the pasuk says that there should be a nachal esan. How do we define nachal? If there's no kanim, it's not a nachal. So these are again halachic nafkaminas. Simin l'shvei l'shikma. What is the implications of saying that the flat grounds has a shikma, sycamore tree? Nafkamina l'nimakachu memkar. Let's say that I'm selling you a piece of property. I call it a shvela. A shvela, by definition, has a shikma, and if it doesn't, then it's a toes. It's a mekachu memkar problem. And then adds the Gemara as one final line before we get to the Mishnah. It's not only by shvela. All of the other reasons still apply, but we have a secondary reason that applies to all the previous examples, not the shvela, but all the other ones, the cases of simin laharim milin, simin la'amakim dekalim, all the other ones, they have a problem, which is that if I say I'm selling you a har, then that har has to grow milin. If I say that I'm selling you an amek, a value, that has to grow dekalim. Otherwise, you're in violation of mekachu memkar. We know, of course, as a preparation for this coming Mishnah, that there's an Isser called Shvisas Behemto. We are not allowed to have our animals do malacha on Shabbos. So this Mishnah is going to deal with some of those issues. Now, one of the rabbinic injunctions that we have is that you're not allowed to sell a behema gasa. You can't sell a cow to a goy. We'll see why, and based on Rashi in a moment. But what was subject to debate is selling a behema daka. What about a smaller animal, a sheep, a goat? So says the Gemara as follows. Makom, the Mishnah, 10 lines, 12 lines from the bottom, Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. The Mishnah writes, Makom shenagu limkor behema daka l'nocher mochrin. In a place where it's customary, minhag, to sell smaller animals to a non-Jew, no problem, you're allowed. Makom shelo nagu limkor ein mochrin. Of course, all of this is in the parak of Makom shenagu. What do we do with conflicting minhagim? Yes, no, maybe if I go to your city, am I allowed to use your rules or my rules? We know we're supposed to follow the chumrah. There are exceptions. But everyone agrees, however, ein mochrin lahem behema gasa. You're not allowed to sell a goy, a behema gasa, whether it's agalim, v'siyachim, smaller animals, shleimim, a totally healthy full animal, ushvur, and even an animal that's broken, even an animal that has broken legs and can't walk. Doesn't make a difference. We don't allow for those sales of the behema gasa to a larger animal. So says Rashi here. Rashi explains that the reason why. Let's see it inside. This is the second line of Rashi within the Mishnah. It's about 8 lines down in the wide lines. Dibur hamaschil uv'chol makom ein mochern lehen behema gasa de gazer be'rabbanan mishum she'el mishum schirus. Oh, what were we concerned about? Why did we say we cannot sell a behema gasa to a goy? Because if that's allowed, then maybe I can also lend it to the goy. Maybe I could also give it out, to rent it to the goy. But if I do that, and then my animal does malacha on Shabbos, I violated Shvisas Behemto. So the Chachamim instituted a Gzera D'Rabbanan. They said that when it comes to a behema gasa, it is an Isser D'Rabbanan to sell a behema gasa to a goy, lest you then not sell it, but only rent it or let him borrow it. And that would be a big problem of Shvisas Behemto on Shabbos. Let's go back into our Mishnah. So we said that you're not allowed to sell a behema gasa at all. However, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the Tanakama. The Tanakama said that if the animal was shavur and had broken legs, for example, and it couldn't even plow the field, it couldn't even do the shvisas behemto. The Tanakama was of the opinion that there's nothing that's still problematic. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shvura. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that you are allowed to do a shvura because your concern falls away. Ben b'seira matir b'sus. Ben b'seira altogether says horses are not part of this rabbinic injunction. Why? Because by and large, the way people utilize horses is that they ride them. And riding a horse is itself an Isser D'Rabbanan. At most, it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. We say you can't ride animals because you may break a stick off, fine. So then if the way that we use animals is not to plow fields, if the way we use animals is to ride a horse, so then that itself is its own Isser D'Rabbanan. But because of that, it would be gzera l'gzera to then add that horses also can't be sold like a behema gasa, because this is the kind of animal that we don't use to work the fields. So therefore, Ben Beseru was matir b'sus. He allowed the sale of horses. These are nafkaminas l'maisa. Let's say you're in the cow business. Can you sell a goy a cow? I've never sold a cow before, but for people who own them, these are shilas. You can sell meat of a cow. That's fine. But can you sell a whole cow to someone knowing that they're going to work the fields? That's an Isser D'Rabbanan. We don't allow for that because we're concerned that if you think it's permissible to sell a behema gasa to a goy, you might then think that it's permissible to lend or to rent one out. Finishing up the Mishnah, 8 lines from the bottom of the page, Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, the Mishnah concludes, Makom shenagu lechol tzli b'leilei Pesachim ochlen, in a place where it's customary to eat roasted meat on Pesach, that's fine. Makom shenagu shelo lechol ein ochlen, but some places had a concern that it looks too much like kachim, and that's not allowed, or we're concerned about that. So the Gemara opens with the very halacha l'maisa. This is actually quoted in Shulchan Aruch exactly like this. I could have photocopied it and brought it to you, but it looks almost exactly like this, almost without change. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Rab, early Amora, he says, Asr lo adam shiumar basar zel pesachu. You see a good slab of meat at the butcher, and you say, this piece of meat, this corned beef, this one's for Pesach. So we say you're not allowed to do that. Why? Mipnei, says the Gemara, mipnei shenir kemakdish behemto v'ochol kachim bachutz. Because it appears as though you're being makdish your animal and eating the kachim outside of the mikdash, which would be aser. So it's an appearance, it's a mechze. It looks like a problem. So therefore, you're not allowed to do it. Amar papa dafka basar. This is only true by meat. However, aval chitelo. It's not true by wheat. You are allowed to find the wheat with which you will make your matzah and say, I'm going to set this aside. Why is that allowed? Dimintar lepischak amar. Because all you're saying is that you're not dedicating it to the mikdash. It's not like it doesn't look like the korban pesach. All you're saying is I'm saving this to make myself matzah. That's fine, but the meat is not allowed. Says the Gemara, basar lo, really, it's not allowed. Well, I have a source in the Tanoim that doesn't seem to agree with you. This was quoted in Brachos, and it's also found in Beitza, in a Brisa and in a Tosefta, 3 lines from the bottom. Meisvei. You said, Rav Papa, that basar, really Rabbi Yehuda Marav, that you're not allowed to dedicate and specify basar for Pesach. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Todos Ishromi. There was a man named Todos Ishromi. We'll learn more about him in a few minutes. Hinhig as b'nei Romi lechol gedim mikulasin b'leilei Pesachim. He said that you can take an animal, and what you can do is you can make it mikulasin. Mikulasin is a reference to taking the fats of the animal and putting it around the head of the animal, which is how the Korban Pesach was roasted. You're allowed to do that on leilei Pesachim. Everyone in Rome did this, so that was normal. Says the Gemara, Kachim Sal skipped a line. Says the Gemara, Shalchulo, the Rabbanim said to Todos Ishromi ilmale Todos ataf, not for the fact that you were Todos. We don't know what that means. Are they scared of him? Is he a Talmud Chacham? We don't know who this person is. We'll ask that question shortly. Ilmale Todos ata, had you not been you, Todos, Gozarnu lachanidi, we would have put you into excommunication. Why? Shatamachel es Yisrael, kachim bachutz. You're feeding Yidden, kachim bachutz. That's not allowed. That's not allowed. So what we were talking, what did we say in our Mishnah? That you're not allowed to dedicate meat. What do you mean you're not allowed to dedicate meat? Todos did it. Todos had people eat things that looked exactly like the Korban Pesach. Says the Gemara first, an interrupting question. Kachim sal kadaitach pashut. It's not kachim. Everyone knows it's not kachim. It wasn't even brought in the Beis Hamikdash. It was in Rome. What are we talking about here? Of kachim bachut. Says the Gemara. Ela ema, turning to the top of Nun Gimel on the base. Karov lahachil as Yisrael kachim bachut. It appears it's karov lahachil. Rashi says dome lekachim. It's not like even remotely close, really, in a halachic terms. It's just dome, it looks like, and therefore one should be careful. Anyways, the Gemara says what is implied from the Gemara of Todos, the Bryce of Todos, is that mekulas in, when there are the fats around the head of the animal, and it mamish looks like the kachim of the kachei shlamim of the Korban Pesach. So then mekulas in, but she'ein mekulas lo. So then it implies that she'ein mekulas, that there would be no problem at all had there not been the fats on top of the head. So that's a stira, because the opening of our Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Marav, says that you're not allowed to dedicate meat. Here we said as long as there's no meat, no fats on the head of the animal, then you are allowed to dedicate the meat as on the side, and we shouldn't be concerned about it. That was Todos. So it says the Gemara, Amrei, no, bad. That's not a good question. Second answer. Second line, here's the answer to the Gemara. Amrei mekulas. What was the case of Todos? Todos was talking about when the fats of the animal were on top of the head. There, loshna amar, loshna lo amar. There, we don't care whether or not you verbally indicate that at that point that you're dedicating it for Pesach with that. Not relevant. What was our case? She'ena mekulas. What Rabbi Yehuda Marav was talking about is a piece of meat that's eina mekulas. It's not covered in all of the fats. So then under those circumstances, piresh in, only if you explicate, you say out loud, so then that's a problem, lo piresh lo. And if you don't, then it's not a problem. So we have supported ourselves in this Gemara. Now, elsewhere in Shas, this is a Gemara Maseches Menachos, and we're going to learn this now, but I'm just giving you some background because the Gemara doesn't present the background. There's a machlokas. If a person says the following thing, they say about themselves, Hare alai mincha b'seurin. If a person says that they want to bring a korban mincha, they make a kabbalah, they make a neder of sorts. They say that they want to bring a korban mincha, but they say that it's with seurin, with barley flour. That's an unacceptable korban mincha. We only bring a korban mincha with chitin. So the Gemara is trying to understand, as we will soon see, do we look at the parts of the sentence? I want to bring a korban mincha, which is an accurate sentence, and one that's halachically viable. But the last word that he said is with barley flour. Do we look at the whole package and say, since the end of the phrase is inaccurate and impossible, so the whole phrase is gone, baby with the bathwater? Or do we say the first part of the sentence makes sense, and therefore he's chayiv to bring a korban mincha? Okay, so he doesn't know, he's not a Talmud Chacham, so he said b'seorin, so he's wrong. But still, this is what we call palginan dibura, where a person's phrases can be broken up and bifurcated into two. So if I say, I would like to bring a korban mincha with barley flour, the first part of my sentence makes sense. The second part of my sentence doesn't. Do we embrace the whole thing and say that he's obligated to bring a korban mincha? Or do we say he doesn't know what he's talking about and the whole thing's a zero? That is subject to a machlokas between Reb Shimon and Reb Yossi. Let's continue in the Gemara. Fourth line down, Nun Gimel Amud Beis. Rav Acha masni lalaha masnisa ki Reb Shimon. Rav Acha, he taught the Mishnah about Todos that one is allowed to eat meat, provided that it's just not mekulas, that it's not covered in the fats. Maybe that's like the shita of Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon was the one who said that the whole line of the korban mincha is a zero. Namely, until you do the whole thing right, the whole thing is irrelevant. You wanted to say that you wanted to obligate yourself in a korban mincha, but you said barley flour. You don't know what you're talking about, so it's a 0. Similarly, Todo said you have an animal that's not mekulas, not close enough. It's totally mutter. So that's the comparison. Then maybe we should say that our Mishnah of Todos, our Bryce of Todos, is similar to the Shita of Reb Shimon in regards to the korban mincha. It says the Gemara, Maskif la Reb Sheshes, Bishlam alamanda tani laka Reb Yossi nicha. I understand the Shita of Reb Yossi. Reb Yossi, when it comes to the sugya of korban mincha, he says palgin on dibur, that we embrace the first part of your phrase that says I want to bring a korban mincha, and even though the second part of your phrase makes no sense because you said you wanted to do it with barley flour, it doesn't make a difference because palgin on dibur, we embrace the first part. So what does that mean? That when you do something part way, it is valuable, which means that when you take the korban pesach, or you take an animal, the gedi, you take that animal even without the mekulas, so then it's still valid. In which case, that would make sense according to Todos. So Bishlam alaman de tani la Rabbi Yossi nicha. I could understand the comparison of the sheet of Rabbi Yossi by korban mincha with the sheet of Todos. Both of them did partial things and they were held accountable. That makes sense. Elalaman de masni la Reb Shimon mi nicha. How could it be? Reb Shimon was of the opinion that it was a 0. Until you do the whole thing right, it's totally fine. And here you didn't do the whole thing right because the implication of the Bryce of Todos was that if it's not mekulas, then there's no problem at all. So says the Gemara, hold on one second. That doesn't make sense. The Mishnah writes in regards to the korban mincha that you tried to do with barley, Reb Shimon poter shelo hisnadev kederech hamisnadbin. The way that you made your nadava was incorrect. That's not how you make an adava by a korban mincha. You don't know what you're talking about. If you say hare alai mincha, hare alai the hakrav of a mincha b'seorin, you're an amaretz. You're a 0. You don't know what you're talking about. The whole thing's rejected. So says Gemara, Rav Shimon, doesn't make any sense. So Omar le Ravina the Rav Ashi uman de masti la Rav Yossi minicha. It doesn't work even according to Rav Yossi. Even according to Rav Yossi, the alignment of the sugya from Todos, the person who said that as long as it's not makulas, you're good to go. So according to that, Rabbi Yossi also doesn't fit. Amar Rabba, because Rabba says, Reb Shimon, Beshitas Rabbi Yossi, Amra. Reb Shimon, who over here by the sugya of Korban Mincha, takes Rabbi Yossi's shita and applies it to Todos. So he doesn't agree with himself, his own shita. He separates himself. In other words, the sugya of the sugya that we're talking about basar that looks like kodshim, and the sugya of korban mincha, they're not comparable to one another, and therefore Reb Shimon takes Rabbi Yossi's shita and he applies it to the world of Todos. Amra de Amar af bigmar dvarav adam nispas. Even if he says the wrong thing at the end, he says it's barley flour, nispas, he's going to be trapped up, he's going to be stuck in keeping the neder, being obligated to bring a korban mincha. So there we see that that's more similar to Todos. Rabbi Yossi nami savar la. Sorry, I skipped a line. My lab, isn't it true? The Reb Shimon savar like Reb Yossi, the Reb Shimon holds like Reb Yossi, that maybe Reb Yossi nami savar like Reb Shimon. Maybe Rabbi Yossi, who over here by Korban Mincha says that Palgin and Dibura, we do split up your speech and we do say that you be chayiv in a Korban, so too it might be problematic with the meat. Wouldn't we say that by the meat he would switch his mind to hold like Reb Shimon because they're reversing their shitas low, says the Gemara. Reb Shimon, savar like Reb Yossi, Reb Shimon does hold like Reb Yossi. Reb Shimon, who over here by the world of Korban Mincha says that until you say everything right, you've said nothing right. But when it comes to Todos, he would agree to Rabbi Yossi's opinion that you did part of it correct, which means he'd have a problem with that this would work for Todos. That's good. But says the Gemara to close out this section, below Rabbi Yossi, Savar like Rabbi Shimon. However, Rabbi Yossi does not flip his shita to say that he holds like Rabbi Shimon, and therefore the Mishnah the Brisa that we have in the name of Todos could very well be within the shita of Rabbi Yossi from the world of Korban Mincha. Ibaylahu, who was this person Todos? We're 1/3 of the way down in Gimel Amud Beis. We're going to be going all the way down to the very last line of the page. Todos Ishromi Gavra Rabba Hava or Baal Egrofen Hava? Was he a Gavra Rabba? Was he a great man, a Talmud Chacham? Was he a wise person, a Tana? Or was he a Baal Egrof, an angry person? He rules with a strong fist. What kind of person was he? So Tashma, I'll give you a beautiful answer, says the Gemara 1/3 of the way down. Oh, Zu Darash Todos Ishromi. He had another drasha. Ma Ra'u Chananya, Mishael va'Azarya, Shemasur Atman al Kedushas Hashem, Lakivshan Ha'esh. We know the famous story that Chananya, Mishael, and Azariah jumped into a Kivshan Ha'esh al Kiddush Hashem. Okay, where did they get that from? So it says the Gemara, Nasu kal v'chomer ba'atam mitzvardeim. They learned it from the frogs, right? That's an unbelievable thing. What? Beautiful. It always aligns. Matzvardeim she'ein mitzuvin al kedushas ein mitzuvin al kedushas Hashem. Obviously, frogs don't have a tzivui about being mekadesh Shem Shamayim with their lives. Obviously not. Ksiv behu, but by them it said ve'alu uvo beisecha uvitanu rechav uvimisharosecha, in your house, in your ovens, and in the pots. Emasai misharos mitzuyos etzel taner. When are the pots near the oven? Havayomer b'shah she'ataner cham. That's when the oven is hot. That's when the oven is very hot. So they made a kal v'chomer. Anu, we human beings, b'nei Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, shemitzuvan al kedushas Hashem. We do have a tzivui to be mekadesh Shem Shamayim b'Rabim, and under, God forbid, circumstances, we would be obligated to sacrifice our lives under the appropriate circumstances. So says the Gemara, Anu shemitzuvan al kedushas Hashem alachas kama v'kama. All the more so, if the frogs were doing it, all the more so we should be doing it. Remarkable kal v'chomer on a lot of levels. It's Omer Dorsheni, and that we need to understand exactly what's going on here, but not for now. Nevertheless, that's where they learned it from. And unrelated, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi bar Avin Amar Matil Malay Lakisal Talmidei Chachamim Haya. He would give a lot. He would fill the pockets of the Talmidei Chachamim. To Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Kol Amatil Malay Ekis Talmidei Chachamim Zoche v'Yoshev b'Yeshiva Shel Maila. If a person fills the pockets of those who are Talmidei Chachamim, they will be zoche to sit in the yeshiva shel mala. A wonderful privilege. A wonderful privilege. Okay, good question. Who should sit and learn? Good. But nevertheless, that's what it means. Shnei Amar, as the pasuk says, ki v'tzela chachma v'tzela kesef. Beautiful. So as mentioned briefly, there is a collection of inuyim on Yom Kippur that one is not allowed to do, and one of them is tashmish amita for a married couple. That there's an issur of tashmish amita. The couple should not be together. So makom shenagu lahadlik esaner b'leila Yom Kippur madlikin. For those who have accustomed to light a candle to remind the couple not to be meshamish mitasam madlikin. If that's the minhag, then great. Then they should continue and light that candle. Makom shenagu shelo lahadlik ein madlikin. But if the place where you live, the custom is not to light that candle on Yom Kippur, so the halacha is makom shenagu shelo lahadlik ein madlikin. Then one should not be madlik. Opposite customs. However, everyone agrees to the following. However, everyone agrees that in shul there should be candles, in the base medrash there should be candles, in dark alleyways there should be candles, and by cholim that there should be candles. So says the Gemara, let's analyze this a little bit. Tana, bein shamu lahadlik uvein shamu shelo lahadlik, both minhagim. Both minhagim in our Mishnah, that one of them which says you should light a candle by Yom Kippur to remind the couple about tashmish amita, one says that you should not. Shneim l'davar echad niskavnu. Everyone was saying the same thing, and in fact, Amar Rav Yeshua, darash Rabba v'anech kulam tzadikim lolam Yeshua aretz v'gomer bein she'amru lahadlik bein she'amru shelo lahadlik shneim lo niskavnu l'davar echad. Everyone agrees to the same exact thing. Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi, 3 lines down in the wide lines, the first Rashi on the Gemara. Rashi says, bein she'amru lahadlik osan shenagu lahadlik v'noagin shelo lahadlik. Both of them, the ones who have the custom to light and the ones who have the custom not to light. Lo niskavnu ela l'davar echad lahafrish atzmo mimishkevei isha. That just to make sure that husbands and wives would not be together. Ha'omrim lahadlik mishum de'in adam mishamish mitasa la'or haner. There's a well-known din quoted in Shulchan Aruch that a couple should not have tashmish amita when there's a lot of light. We know, of course, as qualified in the Meforshim and in the Shulchan Aruch, that you can be ma'apil with the talisa. One could cover, the couple could cover themselves with a blanket. That would then be appropriate. And the other shita was the other way. The other option says, well, if there is a candle, then a man can see his wife and be attracted to her, and then that may instigate tashmish amita. So both of these minhagim were oriented around the same exact concept, which was to prevent one from violating one of the chamesh sinuim. But it's a minhag. It's a minhag. The prevalent minhag nowadays is to light a candle in a safe way to remind the couple about the isurim of tashmish amita on Yom Kippur. Says the Gemara, about lighting candles on Saturday night. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Ein mevarchen al haor ela b'motzai Shabbos. The only time in Havdalah that we make the bracha borim meorei ha'esh, that is on Motzei Shabbos, but not on Yom Kippur. Because that's when fire was created. So we commemorate the fact that fire was created on Motzei Shabbos weekly by saying Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh, and then we look at the poskim say look at the reflection off of your nails, because when you're looking at it, the hana is not that you can see the candle; it's that you can see it lighting something else up. So when you're looking at your nails, so some of the Meforshim say it's a siman of achdus when you take your hand and you put it up like this, so all of your fingers are uneven. But when you fold your hands down and hold it up to the light, all of your nails are they're all the same height. So this is the siman of achos. You have Jews who have plenty of different kinds of Jews. When you look in the light, all of the Jews are banim lamakom. So the Gemara says that's our Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel, that's our custom. Amar lei hahu saba v'itema Rabba bar bar Chana yasher. This is correct. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that this is correct. However, there was another version of Rabbi Yochanan that seemed to imply, and we'll learn this by the story. It's not written explicitly in the Gemara, but the story certainly implies as much, that Rabbi Yochanan was of the opinion that we don't only make the bracha borim yarei ha'esh on Motzei Shabbos, but we also do so on Motzei Yom Kippur. What's the story? We are approximately 10 lines from the bottom of the page. Says the Gemara, Ula hava rachiv chamra va'azil. Ula was traveling on a donkey. V'hava shakil va'azil Rabbi Abba miyamine. Rabbi Abba was to his right. V'Rabba bar bar Chana mismole. So you had Rabbi Abba, and then you had Rabbi Yochanan, then you had Ula, and then you had Rabba bar bar Chana. Amar le Rabbi Abba le'Ula. Rabbi Abba all the way on the right says to the man in the middle. He says to Ula, Vaday de Amrisu, I know that it was definitely said, Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan, Ein mevarchen al ha'or el b'motzei Shabbos, hol v'tchilas briyaso. Isn't it definitely the case that that's what was said? So here's the problem here. In the backdrop, the Meforshim write is that Ula learned from Rabbi Abba's question that Rabbi bar bar Chana had said something wrong. So he turned and looked at Rabbi bar bar Chana. Hadar Ula chaza be'be Rabbi bar bar Chana bishus. He looked at him with a negative face. He's like, what are you talking about? That's not how Rabbi Yochanan holds. Rabbi Yochanan holds that you do say a bracha on Motzei Yom Kippur. Amar le ana lava ha'amre. No, I know that Rabbi Yochanan says it's mutter to, not mutter, that it's the din that we should say borim yarei ha'esh on Motzei Yom Kippur. I know he says that. My comment that I said to Rabbi Abba was about something else. Ela ha'amre. The Tani Tana coming to Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Shimon ben Elazar, Omer Yom Kippur Shchadosh b'Shabbos, Af b'Makom Shomer Shelo Lahadlik Madlikim Yimnei Kvod HaShabbos. That when Yom Kippur and Shabbos intersect, when they overlap, that you do light candles. Vani Rabbi Yochanan Basrei v'Chacham Mosrim. Rabbi Yochanan was of the opinion that no, you don't light candles. You don't light candles at that time. Omer le Adatehei. Now I understand what you're talking about. Rashi, 2 lines from the bottom. That I agree to. So basically, the conclusion of the Gemara seems to be that Rabbi Yochanan was of the opinion that we do light a candle on Motzei Yom Kippur. We will start Emir Tashem tomorrow night from Kari Alei Rav Yosef on the bottom line of Nun Gimel Amud Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.